For most of us, when we think about comics, we connect this with a young reader, probably a child, or we might think of a childish adult. Part of the issue facing comics here is that the child reader graduates from pictures to block text. That's the reader development that we all went through. So reading anything with pictures after that might feel regressive. But here's the thing. Much like fairy tales, the association of comics with childhood is an accident of our domestic history. And only seeing comics in this light can cause us to ignore a rich resource of literature. And given the popularity of the comic form, we might be overlooking something that could be beneficial to learners. In the August 1977 edition of the Harvard Educational Review, Tom Wolfe wrote the following. This is a good quotation. It articulates the point I'm trying to make really well. But as you can see, and certainly in contrast to the rest of the presentation so far, while this is useful information, it's not an interesting visual. So why include it like this in my visual aids, when instead I could do something like, according to Tom Wolfe, for the last 100 years, the subject of reading has been connected quite directly to the concept of literacy. Learning to read has meant learning to read words. But reading has gradually come under close scrutiny. Recent research has shown that the reading of words is but a subset of a much more general human activity, which includes symbol decoding, information integration, and organisation. Indeed, reading, in the most general sense, can be thought of as a perceptual activity. The reading of words is one manifestation of this activity, but there are many others. The reading of pictures, maps, circuit diagrams, musical notes. Thanks, Tom. So, reading comics or graphic novels can be just as viable and useful as reading books. Brilliant, we could end our talk here. But I think that in order to really consider how comics might be used in learning environments, we should spare a moment to consider why we might employ them at all. After all, it can't just be because we like them and, they're good. Scott McCloud puts this brilliantly in his book, Understanding Comics. He points out that when we see 2 dots and a line, our brains tell us that it's a face. But he goes on to argue that the amazing thing here isn't that we see a face, but that we cannot help but see a face. Our brains won't let us see anything else. This begs the question, why? Why would anyone respond to a cartoon as much or more than a realistic image? Here's a suggestion. Comics tend to be more abstract representations of reality. And what happens when we abstract a face? We tie into something that our minds are doing all the time anyway. We can't always see our own faces, but we do have an abstract awareness of them. We are aware of ourselves as abstractions. So when we see an abstracted face like 2 dots and a line, more people can identify with it and project themselves into it. So how do we use comics? Well, the more obvious ways are to put them on the reading list. The chance of there being a title connected in some way to your area of teaching is fairly strong. There are also graphic novel versions of a number of the classics. Now for the less obvious ways that I'm a little more interested in myself. That is using the tools of creativity to develop critical thinking. And this moves us away from comics and towards animation, though the principles we're exploring are the same. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to my avatar.
Thanks. I've been watching a video podcast lately about computer games called Extra Credits, and I urge you to do the same. It really is excellent. But it occurred to me that each of these episodes, which are between 5 to 8 minutes long, have a lot in common with Pecha Kucha. They have a similar short form and they use images rather heavily, a lot like I'm doing right now. But there's something about them that I find even more engaging than the Pecha Kucha presentations I've been researching. I can only assume that it has something to do with the use of cartoons. Now, it would be easy to assume that because cartoons are being utilised, this is a lower, more childish form of art and therefore learning. But we've dealt with that in our consideration of comics, so I'm going to assume that we can all recognise that this use of image is not a childish form of learning. Instead, I hope that you can see that what I'm doing here is using the abstraction of a person, in this case me, in order to connect more directly to you, the viewer, and hopefully I've got your attention. Why and where could using a short animated sequence like this one be useful? As you know, I teach sci-fi, fantasy and horror writing. And, well, There's a lot to cover in 11 weeks. Each genre is broken down in terms of how it works and its historical development. We also look at examples from the genre, and well, it all breaks down like this. In the first week, there's an introduction to the module, and popular fiction and literary fiction fight it out. Then we look at the roots of fantasy. In week 3, world building. In week 4, the roots of science fiction, followed by dystopia and writing science fiction today. In week 6, the roots of horror. In week 7, a closer look at the uncanny and writing horror. In week 8, presentation preparation. Weeks 9 and 10, presentations, leaving the last week for some peer review. That's a pretty packed itinerary, and if I were going to shave it anywhere, it would probably be in the historical overviews. But then that information is really important, and losing it might take away some of the depth from the module. But thanks to Pecha Kucha and extra credits, I think I've found a solution. I'm going to create some short animations like this one that go into the historical development of each genre, so the information is still being delivered, but more time is made available for writing and review. The great thing here is that I don't think I'll really lose anything. In fact, I think I'm gaining a valuable element to the course, and it's left me wondering, could we all do things like this? I mean, all we really need are some basic template characters, an unchanging background, and the willingness to spend a little time on it. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about recently. I'll let you know how sci-fi goes. I hope you enjoyed my Pecha Kucha. Thanks for listening.